Hello, everyone. It is 11:15, so we are going to get started with our next presentation. Coming up next, we have, by the way, I'm Allison Zach from the Human Beaver Coexistence Fund. I've said that too many times already today. So I am going to pass it over to, we have 5 students from Middlebury College. They are going to each introduce themselves, and they will be presenting on Beaver StoryMapping, supporting student learning and science communication.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Thank you. We're going to be talking to you today about Beaver StoryMapping, student learning and science communication. This is a project that we conducted during our conservation biology class at our college, Middlebury College in Vermont, taught by the lovely Dr. Alexis Mychajliw. Can you raise your hand? There she is. I'll start. Hi, my name is Haydn. I'm from northern Wisconsin. Anybody from Wisconsin? Hey, did you go to Northland? Awesome. I'm from Washburn. I'm an environmental studies and biology major, and I will be graduating in February.
I'm Helen. Can you hear me okay? Yeah, okay. I'm Helen. I'm also graduating this February. I'm a biology major, double minoring in food studies and global health, and I'm from Southern Maine.
Hi, everybody. My name's Kendall. I'm a senior at Middlebury College this year, so I'll graduate in May. I'm from upstate New York, also a environmental studies and biology major and a minor in music.
Hi all, my name is Sam. I'm originally from Los Angeles, California. I'm at Middlebury College studying conservation biology, minoring in music, and I'll also be graduating in the spring, or in May, yeah.
Hello, my name is Lucy Day. I am from Seattle, Washington. I am also a conservation biology major, and I will be graduating in February.
Great, so before we get into the nitty-gritty of our presentation, we want to just give a quick overview of the takeaways that we hope everyone will understand by the end of our presentation. So first of all, ArcGIS Story Maps is a really accessible, interactive platform that would be a great communication tool for any organization here. And secondly, for our educators in the room, story maps are a really easy way for students to learn science communication tools using a variety of data sources. And as students, we have a really unique opportunity to be a sort of go-between person between access to scientific literature and mapping tools and creating accessible information for the public. Thank you. So first of all, what is a story map? To understand what a story map is, first we need to understand what ArcGIS is. GIS stands for Geographic Information System, and ArcGIS Online is part of the greater ArcGIS ecosystem. So it is an online mapping and analysis tool. It's really cool because it's relatively easy to use. None of us were GIS experts before this class, and we all figured it out. And it's very collaborative, which is really nice. You can use a variety of different data types. Here are some screenshots from our own data that we use. So you can use point data, which could be, singular beaver occurrences, line data, which could be streams or boundaries, and polygons, which could be, ideal beaver habitat. And ArcGIS is really nice because you can overlay these layers of data for really unique interpretation and analysis of your maps. So then what is a story map? Story map is part of the ArcGIS ecosystem as well. And it's a web-based application that you can use, like its name implies, to tell stories. So as you can see there on the left, that little screenshot of the toolbar box, there's a lot of different features and different types of media that you can input into your story map to tell your story. So here are some screenshot examples from our own story maps. You can have text next to pictures and have scrolling text as your picture stays the same. In the bottom right here is an example of a video or a image gallery that is really unique, where you can slide back and forth between before and after images. And if we continue on to the next slide, like I mentioned, since story maps as part of ArcGIS, it's really easy to put your maps that you made in ArcGIS into your story. And so you can have sliding text next to your maps, and it's very interactive, so your viewer can zoom into different parts of the map that they find interesting. Like I mentioned, you can embed videos into your story maps. You can change the text and the font and the sizing, like for the quote that we have here. And we will give a little bit more of an in-depth tour of our story maps later, but this is just an overview of all the different things you can do in story maps.
All right, so our process, for some context, in our class, which was called Conservation Biology, we had the opportunity to partner with some national conservation organizations, such as the Beaver Institute, and then to practice our scientific communication skills. I think it's worth saying there were 3 groups in our class that chose to work with the Beaver Institute, and the 5 of us represent 2 of those groups. I've learned that everybody loves a good conceptual map, so from the beginning, we started off with conversations with Adam from the Beaver Institute and sort of addressed what our goals were for the project and any knowledge gaps or areas of action to take. We brainstormed how to do that, how to achieve these goals, who is our target audience, and then dove into the research, doing a literature review, identifying data sources that Sam will talk about later. And then, of course, developing our maps, putting them into our story map, deciding photos, anything else we wanted to add, and of course, through the entire process, getting feedback from our classmates and from the Beaver Institute, and revising our product as needed until we were ready to publish.
Yeah, and so in order to tell our story, like the core of that was the data. These sources of information that are often made inaccessible or unwelcomed in an unwelcoming format to the general public. But one of the great things about ArcGIS Story Map is that it makes taking accessible data really easy to deliver to the public. And so one of the sources that we used was the International Union of Conservation of Nature, or IUCN Red List. And what this organization does is provide a comprehensive checklist of a variety of taxa in relation to their risk for extinction. And the way that they create these reports is through a very comprehensive set of criteria established by the IUCN Red List. But some important data that you can gather from the Red List is range data. If you take a look at this map here on the right, you can see a map created from IUCN Red List data that shows the expected range of North American beavers. Another very valuable, free and accessible data source was GBIF, which stands for the Global Biodiversity Information Facility. And this organization provides very valuable occurrence data. If you take a look at that map over there on the right, each of those points represents a case of an occurrence of a North American beaver. And they gather their data through a plethora of sources from their affiliate project partners, which can come in the form of eDNA, historical records from museum, and just general expert knowledge. And finally, another resource we encourage people to look at are just general federal and state organizations. You're all familiar with APHIS, the Animal Plant Health Inspection Service. We use their data that's available on APHIS intervention for damaging beaver wildlife conflict. And then we also, from North Carolina's Wildlife Resource Commission, we were able to pull data that was related to harvesting data connected to beavers. And so we were able to take sometimes these complex and uninviting data sources and use ArcGIS to make them more inviting. And so the workflow is pretty simple. You can easily pull data from sources like GBIF into an Excel sheet where you can then pick the type of data that you're looking for and the way you want to present it, then upload it to ArcGIS where you can make your map. And as mentioned before, that map can easily be integrated into your ArcGIS story. Next slide. Here's an example of one of the maps that we created looking at beavers in North Carolina. And as you can see, it takes this, all these numbers and things that can be a little daunting to the general public and displays it in a way that is easy to interact with and can tell a very comprehensive story.
All right, give us just a moment. Go over the actual story map. Okay, so this is the published product. During this presentation, we're mostly going to focus on the formatting and the story as opposed to the actual findings. We'll talk about that a little bit. But if you're curious, we'll have the QR codes at the end of the session. You can scan them and take a look. To choose our topic, we worked with the Beaver Institute to identify a gap in knowledge, and they mentioned to us that there's not a lot of information about beavers in the Southeast. So we decided to explore that idea. To introduce our topic, we had a little bit of text, and then Lucy made a map using GBIF occurrence data, like Sam was talking about, to show beaver records over time. So you can see as Helen is scrolling on the sidecar, it changes the map, and there's definitely a recency bias here with iNaturalist. And you can zoom into the map, pan around. Let's say you want to look at Boulder, Colorado. How are we doing on beavers? Pretty good. So another feature you can incorporate. Then we went into just more of setting the scene for our case study, the history of beavers in the Southeast. We started with the original caretakers, incorporating some Native American perspectives who have been leaders today on modern beaver revitalization efforts. We talked about the history of the fur trade, and then what's going on today in the Southeast, where beavers are often seen as a nuisance species, something to get rid of. Then we talked a little bit about state regulations in North Carolina, where there's pretty good information, and then in Alabama, where there's not really very good information. And then we talk a little bit about ecosystem services specific to the Southeast. We wanted to incorporate this because the South has underserved communities that are disproportionately affected by climate change, and so we wanted to highlight how it's especially important to reintroduce beaver into these areas. You can see there's a little slider that's actually not in the Southeast. That's from Utah, because there's not a lot of pictures of beaver in the Southeast. And then we also want, this is a picture of the Lumbee folks from North Carolina. We wanted to highlight that indigenous peoples have recognized the value of beavers for thousands of years and that they should be consulted first when it comes to revitalizing and reestablishing beavers in the Southeast. Then we went into a case study, North Carolina. If you were at the talk yesterday over in the West Room, you may have heard some UNC students talking about this, but they're doing better than they were. So some text about that. And then Lucy made a graph in RStudio, which is another free-to-use data analysis program. It's more coding, so it's a little more complicated. But this shows beavers killed or euthanized in the South as reported by APHIS. You can see there's definitely a lack of information about some of the states like Georgia, Louisiana. That's another issue that we identified doing this project. And then the final map, which I made, shows where beavers live in North Carolina now, as represented by the orange triangles, which is GBIF occurrences. And then pink lines are impaired waterways, as identified by the EPA. And then blue polygons are conservation areas. So you can zoom in, you can try and tell your story with the zooms, different levels of zooms on the map. First, we zoom into the research triangle, where there's a healthy amount of beaver data and even some indication that they're living on impaired waterways, which is pretty cool. But then you zoom over to Robeson County, which is an ethnically diverse and pretty low-income area, and you can see there's not a lot of data there on beavers, not really able to understand the ecosystem services that they might provide in that community without knowing if there's beavers there first. So that's an issue that we identified. Then we can move over to the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. Also, not a lot of beaver data here, maybe surprisingly. So we suggested maybe working with the Park Service or other federal agencies to implement more citizen science in these areas to get more information. Then we went down to our conclusion and our recommendations, and now that people are interested, now that we presented all of these materials, we wanted to provide some concrete ways for them to get engaged with the issue. So we mentioned the Beaver Institute, Project Beaver, our main takeaways and recommendations. And then down at the bottom, we have our sources. We just linked to a public Google Drive, which should be working now, right? Yes. Okay, yes, it's working if you want to check it out. But you can also, they have a little tool where you can build a bibliography, and it looks pretty professional. So that's our story map. Hand it off to Kendall.
Yeah, so we've talked a lot about story maps, kind of what we've done with them, but now I'm going to take a second and talk about, the next slide, talk about how you actually build a story. Is anybody familiar with this style of chart? Have you seen this before? Okay, cool. Yeah, so not only are we scientists, but we're inherently storytellers, and I think that's really important when you're building a presentation, especially like this through ArcGIS story maps. So you have sort of your 5 elements of a story. So you start with your introduction, and this is where you're identifying and scoping your research topic. With ArcGIS story maps, you're drawing in your audience with different forms of captivating media, which I hope you've seen in the story map that we showed you. Next, that's followed by your rising actions. So here, you're building your story. What do we know about this topic, and why should your audience care about it? You can do this by varying how your information is conveyed, using a lot of the different story map features that Haydn just showed us. And finally, you're getting to the point in your story where you have your climax, or you're identifying a goal or message that you want to share with this research. Again, this can be something that's highlighted by a lot of the different story map features that you have available. Next, you have your following action, which is where you're reviewing current research on this topic. So things like what's currently being done, what should be being done, that sort of thing. And here you can provide direct links to relevant scientific papers and resources. I don't think we displayed that feature specifically, but you can embed those directly into your story map, and people can then have the option of like clicking directly on the paper that you used with building your own story map. Again, always cite your sources. And lastly, ending with your conclusion, you can suggest next steps and what could be any recommended takeaways, as they did with their story map. Speaking of takeaways, we have some of our own takeaways that we hope that you'll keep with you after our presentation today. So we've kind of formatted this into 2 different segments, but please take whatever resonates with you. So in terms of looking at it as a more of the researchers and professional side, you can be using ArcGIS to create maps and figures that are engageable by the public. As you've seen, based on some of the graphics that we presented, a lot of this data is hard to look at if you don't have it organized in a way that's accessible. So using this platform is a great way to create maps that are generally more engageable by the public. Yeah, and falling right into that. This is just making research more engaging to people who maybe aren't engaging with science on a day-to-day basis, and it can make it a lot more accessible to them. Yeah, followed right into my next point. And if you're more on the side of an educator or a student, using this platform, you utilize a variety of media types and features to engage learners. And I think, falling into the second point, this is really helpful in engaging especially younger audiences with science. As you saw, this platform is sort of analogous to scrolling through social media, which provides a much more engageable way to view this topic and material, where younger audiences are much more familiar. And lastly, it presents learning opportunities for engaging with new tools, databases, especially map making. I think, like Helen mentioned earlier, none of us are GIS experts, but we all can do it, and so can you. And we'd just like to leave you with the fact that science communication starts with the scientist, and we must make that our priority. Science should be collaborative.
Oh, there we go. All right, well, thanks for coming, folks. You can scan the left, as I was saying. You can scan the left QR code to explore the story map that we already presented about beaver conservation in the Southeast United States. On the other side is Kendall's story map that her group made about firefighting beavers using some of the research from Dr. Emily Fairfax, right? Down in the bottom left-hand corner are our sources of funding, so we could actually travel out here to Colorado. Thanks, folks. Our contact information down there in the middle, and I would like to add that we're all graduating and we're all in the job market these days. So if you got any leads, feel free to drop us a line. We got our emails right there. Come talk to us after the presentation. And I hope we have a little time for questions. Thank you.
Questions?
So you all did this as juniors in college, is that correct?
Junior, seniors.
Junior, senior. What's the earliest age you would recommend doing this with?
Kendall wants to be a teacher someday.
Yeah. I can try my best to answer this. I honestly think that this is a platform that anybody can use, given that they have somebody who's familiar with it enough to show them how to use it. And I think that it's great to introduce it to younger audiences, especially because, as you saw, it's a pretty accessible format. There's not a lot of button clicking. You can just kind of scroll through. So if you become an expert, then it's really easy to teach other people how to use it.
I'm excited about this for a couple of reasons. One, I just retired from the Environmental Protection Agency where I ran the program that produced the GIS maps. I probably signed off on the one that you just used. And then the other thing, in retirement, I'm trying to find something to do, so I've started a fledgling beaver interest group in Atlanta, and we're calling ourselves a Southeastern Beaver Group. So I really need this, so I want to talk to y'all more about that. So thanks so much.
Any other questions? We do have 2 minutes, way in the back.
Thank you so much for a wonderful presentation, and a shout out to the Febs. I was also a Middlebury Feb, people who start and end in February. That was a great, lots of really good information there, and they are clearly a very powerful way to share information. I now am studying in Alaska, and we generally across the University of Alaska and Fairbanks have strayed away from story maps, because in a lot of rural places in Alaska, internet is hard to come by. It's very expensive, and it's often very slow and inconsistent. So it's just a little bit of a caveat. Rural Alaska is probably a pretty extreme example, but just something to keep in mind too, that lack of internet resources is not unique to rural Alaska. It's also across rural lower 48, especially in reservations too. So just a small note that to make sure to remember who your audience is and what their limitations might be.
Does anyone want to?
That's a great point, and we kind of prepared for that possibility that we wouldn't be able to use the internet here by recording the story map, and if it didn't work, we were going to play the video and talk over the video. So that's an option you can do. If you're not able to actually access the internet, you can record it and then play it later. But it's a great point.
Thank you all. We are out of time for this one. Our next presentation will be in about 5 minutes.